Dear students, welcome once again to the Management of Organizations class. It's a good thing you're taking this course this summer, and I'm your professor. My name is Dr. Somto Chukwudike. We'll start this class with the chapter 1, and it's on managing and the manager's job. The learning objectives for this chapter include an understanding of who a manager is and what management is all about in the context of an organization, and why a manager is important and why management is important. Also, we'll be looking at the 4 basic management functions in an organization. And just a brief on those, these functions would include the planning and decision making, the organizing, the controlling, and the leading. Also, we'll be looking at the kind of managers you find at the different levels and different areas of an organization. Further on the learning objectives, we'll be looking at the managerial roles that are undertaken by managers in an organization and the relevant skills that they require for them to succeed in these roles. Also, we'll be looking at the concepts of science and art of management and how people actually become managers and the scope of management within organizations. We'll also be looking at what you call the new workplace and how that is evident in organizations today. Organization is a group of people working together in structured and coordinated fashion to achieve a set of goals. We are adopting a resource-based definition of management for this class because it's elusive basically to define management. Management can be defined in several ways, but the resource-based definition of management says that all organizations use 4 basic resources from the environment, and these resources would include the human, financial, physical, and information resources. So it's basically telling you that these resources are required in the context of an organization for organizations to achieve their goals. So management is basically a set of activities, and this set of activities would include the managerial functions of planning and decision making, organizing, controlling, and leading. And this set of activities are directed at the resources of an organization that are utilized for achieving organizational goals. Why these activities are geared towards these resources is for efficient and effective utilization of these resources in the achievement of organizational goals. Also, we'll be looking at an organizational structure. An organizational structure basically relays information on the composite functions within an organization, the hierarchy, the reporting lines, and the levels or stratification of management within an organization. The management activities, like we said earlier, would include the efficient and effective planning, organizing, controlling, and leading of the human, financial, physical, and information resources of an organization. The 4 resources that are utilized in the environment of an organization. For the purpose of context, we will adopt Francis Marion University as our organization of interest. The first of the 4 resources that can be used in the environment of an organization is human resources, and this comprises managerial talent and the labor force of an organization. Now, in Francis Marion University, the human resources would include faculty members that are there to teach the students of Francis Marion University. It will include the administrators of Francis Marion University. It will include members of staff that ensure the well-being of faculty members and students alike. Now, the second of the resources in an organization's environment is the financial resources, and this refers to capital or revenue that is utilized in the funding of ongoing and long-term operations of an organization. In Francis Marion University, because it's a state-owned institution, some of its capital or revenue comes from the state government. It's a financial resource. Now, it goes without saying as well that the tuition that are paid by students is a source of revenue or source of capital for funding ongoing activities in Francis Marion University. And you may want to say, what are the ongoing activities or operations? Basically, like even payment of power supply bills is an ongoing operation of Francis Marion University. The payment of overhead costs for their members of staff and faculty, that's an ongoing operation as well. And these sources of revenue or revenue that is generated from these sources are basically allocated towards these operations. Now, the third resource that is utilized in the environment of an organization would be the physical resources, and this will include raw materials of an organization, facilities and equipment as well. Now, in Francis Marion University, the buildings that house classrooms, that house offices, these are physical resources. The furniture that students sit on, these are physical resources. The projectors, the electronic boards as well, these are physical resources that are utilized in facilitating learning for students of Francis Marion University. Now, the fourth of the resources utilized in the environment of an organization would be the information resources. And information resources basically are data that can be utilized in making effective decisions within an organization. Now, an example of an information resource or an information resources, examples of those in Francis Marion University would be the student handbook, the faculty handbook, even the syllabus that are handed out to students or given out to students. Basically, the student handbook, I believe, contains information on the expected behaviors or the acceptable behaviors within Francis Marion University, and also the consequences or punishments for non-compliance or having to express non-compliant behaviors, right? So basically, in the event that students are non-compliant or they express non-compliant behaviors, there's a student who is non-compliant, right? Such handbook, the information contained in it is referenced for decision making on what the punishment would be for non-compliance, if that makes sense. Now, the syllabus as well that is handed out to students is a basis for final decisions on what student grades are when their final grade points are in, right? So it's an information that is available to both students and the faculty member that gave it out to the students for them to both make their decisions and accept the decisions that are made with regards to grade points and their attendance grades. Management should be efficient. The efficiency of management refers to the wise and cost-effective utilization of the resources of an organization. And an example that is provided here is the producing of high quality products at low costs. In the context of Francis Marion University, This would be, for instance, if there's a vacant faculty position and this position can be adequately filled by an assistant professor, an associate professor, and a professor. Producing high quality product at low cost in this context would be to hire an assistant professor to teach the classes or to fill this vacant faculty position, in the sense that that would be the optimal utilization of this human resource, because this human resource has the competence to deliver on the responsibilities of this job role. As well, the Francis Marion University is allocating the the most cost-effective financial resources in the hiring of this human resource or in the maintenance of this human resource, which is, it would cost more to hire a professor to teach this or to fill this position more than it will cost to hire an associate professor. In the same vein, it will cost more to hire an associate professor over an assistant professor. Therefore, efficiency of management in Francis Marion University here would be to hire a competent assistant professor to fill this vacant faculty position. Now, management should be effective. Effectiveness of management refers to the making of right decisions and success in the implementation of these decisions that have been made. Now, an example of those that was provided is the producing of enough but not too much so as to carry inventory. Now, these are for organizations in the manufacturing industry. In the context of Francis Marion University, an example of effective management would be where there is need for a product or for a physical resource like the School of Business and Education building, right? And Francis Marion University, rather than putting up, or the management of Francis Marion University, rather than putting up such an edifice to house only the School of Business or maybe only the School of Education, right, they could actually occupy the whole space. One school could actually occupy the whole space if need be, right? But the effective utilization of this, whereby you can provide adequate space for the classrooms and offices of both the School of Business and School of Education without creating redundancy in space. That is the idea behind having to house both the School of Education and the School of Business in that building, because both the spaces for classrooms and the spaces for offices are optimally utilized, whereby there is no redundancy in space. Manager is someone whose primary responsibility or primary task is to carry out the management process or to operationalize management. In the context of Francis Marion University, a typical example of a manager in the School of Business is the Dean of the School of Business. And the Dean of the School of Business carries out the management process or operationalizes management by carrying out the managerial functions of planning and decision making, organizing, leading, and controlling of both the human, financial, physical, and information resources of Francis Marion University that are under his purview at the moment. Now, for planning, this is about setting an organization's goals and deciding on how best to achieve them. In Francis Marion, for instance, if the goal is to expand the student population as the goal of the university, then for the Dean of the School of Business, who is a manager in the School of Business, the goal of the School of Business will probably or most likely be to expand the number of classes, to expand for increased student population. And in the course of setting such organization goal, which is expanding the class sizes, right, the number of classes offered and the class sizes, which is in tandem with the organizational goal of expanding student population, the manager also, who is the dean of the School of Business, decides on how best to achieve them, which is one course of action on achieving them would be to ensure that there is enough human resource to facilitate for learning of this increased number of student intake, which means that there should be sufficient faculty members in place to teach the growing population of students that will be entering the School of Business. Now, decision making is part of the planning process that involves setting a course of action from a set of alternatives. Now, in the event, for instance, that the School of Business has a goal of expanding their class sizes, providing for more number of classes, and one way they've decided on achieving this is to ensure that there is also faculty members in position or in place to facilitate for learning when this student population comes in, right? Because in achieving their goal, having these students in place, the main purpose of Francis Marion is to ensure learning, right? So having faculty in place to cater for the growing student population would be a way to achieve that, right? So in deciding a course of action from a set of alternatives, which is decision making, one of the course of actions would be to declare vacancy, which is saying, yes, there is need for the hiring of a new faculty member, right? Or there could be another alternative, which is having faculty members that are already existing in the School of Business taking up more classes, right? Now, if for instance that the alternative is to hire, for instance, there are options in hiring. There could be the option of hiring a full-time faculty, a part-time faculty, or an adjunct faculty, right? Or even engaging retired faculty. These are a set of alternatives whereby the manager, who is the dean of School of Business, for instance, can basically undertake. Organizing has to do with the determination of how activities and resources of an organization are to be grouped. In Francis Marion University, the School of Business of Francis Marion University to be specific, the activities are grouped under accounting, business administration, computer science, economics, finance, management, and marketing. So also the courses offered in the School of Business are grouped under these categories. The leading managerial function has to do with the set of processes that ensure that members of the organization work together to further the interests of that organization. In Francis Marion University, some elements of the leading managerial function would be faculty meetings that hold from time to time where members of faculty come together to actually advance the interests of their individual schools and colleges, and invariably advance the interests of Francis Marion University. Also, in the School of Business, we have the School of Business faculty meetings as well from time to time where progress for the School of Business is discussed, matters arising in the School of Business are discussed, as well as to see that the progress of the School of Business is sustained. The controlling managerial function also has to do with how organizational progress towards the attainment of their goals, how that is actually monitored or how that is measured. For example, in Francis Marion University, because it is a teaching institution that is more concerned with the effective transfer of knowledge to students, you have in place the faculty evaluations that come up towards the end of the semester, whereby students have to evaluate the professor on the course they delivered in the course of the semester, right? That is a control measure to actually evaluate for how well Francis Marion University is passing on learning to their students, how well their students are confident that they are actually benefiting or gaining knowledge by being in the classroom. This diagram illustrates the interwoven nature of the managerial functions that are undertaken by managers in an organization. It tells you that managers could actually undertake some of these functions simultaneously, could undertake them sequentially, or could actually carry out some of these functions in no sequence at all. This pyramidal structure on the slide highlights the three tiers, the three basic tiers actually, or three basic levels of management within organizations, whereby at the top or highest level of management you have the top managers, at the middle level of management you have the middle managers, and at the base of the pyramid you have the first line managers. The top managers in an organization are relatively a small group of executives, and these executives manage the overall organization by creating the goals of the organization, the overall strategy, and the policies that guide the operations of the organization. And you find out that in organizations, some of the titles of these top managers would include vice presidents, the CFO, and the CEO. In Francis Marion University, for instance, the top managers will include the president of the university, the vice presidents in the university, as well as like the provost. The provost may be considered a vice president of faculty. Yeah, these would be considered top managers in Francis Marion University. Middle managers are those managers in an organization that are tasked with the implementation of the policies and plans that have been developed by the top managers. And you find out that these managers also supervise and coordinate the activities of the lower level managers, or managers you may call the first line managers. And the titles of some of these middle managers include plant manager, division head, operations manager. In Francis Marion University, for instance, a middle manager would be like the dean of the School of Business, right? So you find out that, for instance, if the plan at the top managerial level, for which the provost is a part of, is to increase student population, then at the middle managerial level, for which the dean of the School of Business is a middle manager, he or she, as the case may be, will now be tasked with increasing student enrollment in business courses, will be tasked with what are strategies or approaches that are to be implemented in order to increase the class sizes, in order to increase the class offerings towards accommodating an increased student population. Now, first line managers would be the managers that supervise and coordinate the activities of operating employees. And some of the titles of first line managers in organizations will include supervisor, coordinator, office managers, right? So in Francis Marion University, for instance, you find out that in the School of Business, we have the first line managers will be the area coordinators in for the various categories or the various departments in the school or subdivisions in the school of business, they have area coordinators, and you can see that coordinator is one of the titles of the first line managers. Now, in other colleges or schools in Francis Marion University, the first line managers may go by the titles like departmental chair. So you find out that these departmental chairs are first line managers that basically supervise every operating employee or every other faculty. And these departmental chairs, who are first line managers, report to the middle managers, who would be like the deans of the colleges or the schools. And the deans of the colleges of these schools now report to a top manager, who is like the provost. When you talk about managing in different areas of an organization, you're talking about the managing of different functions of an organization. And by functions, I mean the different departments of an organization or the different structures in an organization. So you would hear me use the word department interchangeably with functions, interchangeably with structures. This all relates to the composing departments or the composing arms of an organization that enable an organization achieve its goals or objectives. So the first we'll be looking at is the marketing managers, right? And it says that these marketing managers will sell the product and work in new product development, promotion, and distribution, right? So in Francis Marion University, for instance, you'll find out that such managers, especially if you're looking at the top level, such marketing managers in Francis Marion University would be like the vice president of university communications, right? Like Anna Todd, because they are basically into marketing the activities of the university, right? Selling the product, which is the learning services that Francis Marion University offers, right? And whatever new product development, like trying to market or advertise the new building for the School of Business and School of Education, you find out that that has been undertaken by the University Communications Department, which is headed by a vice president, right? So looking at the financial managers, looking at like people who manage the financial services department of an organization, right? You find out that what these managers do is that they undertake accounting, cash management, and investments. So in Francis Marion University, for instance, if you're looking at who a financial manager is, and especially if you're looking at that in the organizational chart from the top level, you will be looking at the executive vice president, Dario Bridges, right, who is basically in charge of the financial services of Francis Marion University. And when you talk about financial services, you can relate that to management of the financial resources of Francis Marion University, which includes management of the revenue generation, the capital generation as it you can use interchangeably, and the disbursement of those funds to the funding of operations of Francis Marion University. This is all something that is planned, organized, controlled, and led by Dario Bridges in Francis Marion University. Now, looking at operations managers, right? In this case, like managers who are in charge of directing the activities of an operations department, you find out that they control production, the inventory, the quality, and plant layout. So trying to draw an analogy of that in Francis Marion University, right? If you're looking at the organizational chart, you may be looking at a position like that of the Vice President of Construction and Facilities, Ralph Davis, right? Looking at that because of what the functions of that role, the functions that that manager at the top level undertakes. Further on managing in the different areas of the organization, and by different areas of the organization, if we recall, this would be the different departments, functions, or structures that compose the organization. So, looking at the human resource managers, this would be managers that are involved in the hiring and development of employees, and this would include the planning, recruiting and selecting, training and development, as well as the retention of employees. So in Francis Marion University, for instance, if you're looking out for a human resource manager on the organizational chart, or what you may call the organizational structure, reflected on there, you may be looking out for positions like the Vice President of Administration and Planning, Dr. Charlene Wages, because her department is actually tasked with hiring. Her department oversees the human resource functions of Francis Marion University. Now, looking at the administrative managers, you find out that these managers are not basically associated with any management specialty. So they are familiar with all the functional areas of an organization in most cases, right? And there are other types of managers you find in organizations, like you have where you have a public relations department, right? You have a manager heading the public relations department, and in most cases that may be a middle manager or it could be a top manager, as the case may be, depending on what type of organization that is. And when you have a research and development department, you will have managers overseeing such departments or functions. And when you have social media departments or social media subdivisions in the public relations department, for instance, you will also have managers overseeing such functions as well. The managerial roles that are undertaken by top managers in an organization are subdivided into three categories, and they include the interpersonal roles, the informational roles, and the decisional roles, as captured under these columns. And you find out that the interpersonal roles are those roles that are involved in dealing with people, and they include the figurehead, the leader, and the liaison. So for the figurehead, this is a position occupied in the hierarchy of an organization, and this position, or whoever is occupying this position, represents the organization during ceremonial or symbolic activities of that such an organization. Now you have the leader, who basically is tasked with coaching, motivating, directing, modeling, or influencing or resolving disputes. So basically, they coach employees, motivate employees, direct the activities of employees, influence the behaviors of employees, they model behaviors too for employees, and resolve disputes too among employees. This is what leaders do, and they encourage employees to improve their productivity, and do so when by showing them how to do it. So they model the behaviors for quality performance by showing employees how to do it, or how to perform highly. Now, the role of the liaison is such a role of the strategic partner, where the person serves as a point of contact to coordinate the activities of two or more people, or groups of people, or organizations, as the case may be. So in this case, it could be activities of two or more people within the department of an organization, or coordination between groups of people, or which could now be the coordination between departments of an organization, right, within an organization, or the coordination between two interfacing organizations, right? Now, informational roles would include roles that involve the processing of information. And these roles are the role of monitor, right? The monitor basically seeks for information that may be of value to the organization. And you have the role of the disseminator, who transmits information to others in the organization. And you have the role of the spokesperson, who conveys information to people outside the organization or outside a department. So, for instance, if it's a communication between two departments, a spokesperson is the person from a representing department who is conveying information from that department to some other department within an organization. Or if it is some communication between two organizations, the spokesperson for one organization is that representative of an organization who is conveying their information to the other organization. Now, the decisional roles would include roles that are primarily tasked with negotiating or making decisions, right? And this would include the roles of an entrepreneur, for instance, right? An entrepreneur basically generates new ideas and initiates the changes in an organization, right? They create the vision, they create new directions, or they come up with novelties in an organization. Those are things that an entrepreneur does. Now you have the role of a disturbance handler as well, who handles problems that arise within an organization, such as industrial action or what you may call strikes, right? Or when there are copyright infringements or a lot of other matters that may arise or issues that may arise within an organization, right? So you find out that disturbance handlers, just like you may see in Walmart, when you have issues with paying at the point of sale, right? You find out that they may call on a manager who comes in to actually address those issues. Those would be disturbance handlers. Now, the role of a resource allocator is the manager who determines who should receive what resources within the organization, right? Who has access to what available resources within the organization. And such resources may include time resources like access to the manager's audience, right? That could be such resources, right? And you have the role of a negotiator who basically represents the organization in negotiations, right? And they undertake approaches such as collective bargaining for a union contract or developing an agreement with a consultant. So these are some of the functions that the negotiator actually undertakes on behalf of the organization. Managerial skills are those competencies that enable managers in an organization carry out their managerial functions as well as manage the resources of an organization effectively and efficiently. And one of such managerial skills is what you call the technical skills. And these are skills basically that are necessary for accomplishing or understanding the kind of work that is done in an organization. So you find out that the technical skills relate to a manager's job knowledge or on the job experience of a manager as well as their job related capabilities. It also relates to a manager's awareness or knowledge or understanding of the legislations or laws that apply to their job roles or their job functions, right? As well as the organizational policies that relate to their job roles and functions. And as an example of such technical skills, it will be the manager's ability to keep up to date with changes in tax codes or laws or relevant legislations. The next managerial skill we'll be looking at is the interpersonal skills. And this relates to the manager's ability to communicate with, understand, and motivate both individual employees or group of employees or maybe individual customers or group of customers. And it has to do with the manager's ability to get along with, for instance, their subordinates, their peers, and their bosses as well. And a manager with strong interpersonal skills, as we may understand, has the ability to develop relationships with customers as well. And such relationships, when they are established, ensures for customer loyalty to the organization, right? So you find out that a manager's interpersonal skills relates to one, in relation to their subordinates, the ability to communicate the expectations, the performance expectations on the job to their subordinates. That would relate to their interpersonal skills. The ability to give a performance appraisal or a performance feedback to their subordinate on how well they are doing on the job. That would relate to a manager's interpersonal skill. Also, the ability to avail their subordinates' time to listen to the concerns on the job or off the job of their subordinates, granting them audience. That would relate to a manager's interpersonal skill, as well as the ability to present whatever issues or whatever gains on the job to an audience. That would relate to their interpersonal skill. Recognizing whatever stresses their employees or colleagues have on the job. All of these elements relate to a manager's interpersonal skills. Now, also, we'll be looking at the conceptual skills of a manager, and it has to do with their ability and a manager's ability to think in the abstract. Now, this is basically the mental capacity of a manager to understand the big picture or the entire workings of the organization or the environment in which their organization operates. This basically means that the manager, in their ability to be very effective and efficient in their job function or in their job roles, they extend such abilities to understanding how their roles are aligned with the organizational goals, right? Or how the goals that are undertaken by their roles align with the goals of the organization. And also knowing how the environment, be it the internal environment of the organization or the external environment of the organization, how it impacts the manager's roles or whatever functions the manager carries out within the organization. The diagnostic skills of a manager refer to the manager's ability to visualize the most appropriate response to a work situation. And this ability actually enables a manager to identify the potential problems or solutions to those work situations that arise. And a typical example of such skills in practice would be a manager's ability to identify what's stalling a work process on an assembly or a manufacturing line, right? And understanding what stalls the free flow of work on an assembly line, as well as coming up with strategies or approaches to ensure the free flow of work on that assembly line would relay or would be an expression of the diagnostic skills of a manager. Now, looking at the communication skills of the manager, this refers to the abilities of the manager to convey ideas and information to others, as well as their ability or disposition to receive ideas and information from others as well. And evidence of the manager's communication skills will be their ability to relay information both verbally and non-verbally, as well as relaying information via emails, reports, and proposals. Another situation where communication skills of a manager would be brought to bear is in their relationship with subordinates in the area of performance target setting. So, a manager's communication skills would aid in clarity in the target setting, or for instance, when there is delegation of work or delegation of tasks on the job, a manager's communication skills will be brought to bear in conveying what the elements of the task or the expectations or the demands of the task are to their subordinates. The diagnostic skills of a manager refer to the manager's ability to visualize the most appropriate response to a work situation. And these abilities enable managers to identify potential problems as well as coming up with appropriate solutions towards addressing these problems. A typical examples of the diagnostic skills being put to bear or brought to bear rather would be the a manager's ability to identify what's stalling a work process on an assembly or manufacturing line, as well as the ability to come up with strategies or approaches that enable for free flow of work on this assembly line. The other managerial skill we'll be looking at on this slide is the communication skills of a manager that refer to the manager's ability to actually or abilities of the manager to convey information and ideas effectively to others, as well as their disposition or abilities to receive ideas and information from others as well. And the ability to relay information verbally and non-verbally via emails, reports, and proposals are all indicative of a manager's communication skills. Also, another work situation where a manager's communication skills would be brought to bear is in the performance target setting. that is done between a manager and their subordinates, or a manager and his or her subordinate rather. In such performance planning situations, a manager's communication skill will be very effective towards conveying clearly to the subordinate the expectations or targets for on the job, performance targets on the job for the period for which the subordinate's performance will be assessed, as well as conveying clearly the elements of a job or task that is being assigned to a subordinate. The decision-making skills of a manager highlight the manager's ability to recognize and define problems and opportunities of a given work situation, as well as the manager's ability to select the appropriate course of action towards solving the problems or exploiting the opportunities in that work situation. So, an example of such decision making skills will be evident whereby a production is stopped by a manager because of a quality issue, or when you find out that there's some form of recall of products with defects from an organization. Those are decisions that are made basically maybe by top managers of an organization to actually embark on a recall of products because of defects or quality issues. Now, also, we'll be looking at the time management skills of a manager, which indicates the manager's ability to prioritize work or the ability to work efficiently or to delegate tasks on the job appropriately to their subordinates, right? Or even to their peers. Managers could actually assign work, but basically, most times they delegate work to their subordinates. Now, this time management skills, some typical examples of a time management skill, the time management skills of a manager would be like a manager who is a professor having to set a timer for notification purposes to alert them when the lecture is almost over so they can round up smoothly and effectively. That would be evidence of time management skills. The science of management proposes that problems that arise in work situations in an organization can be addressed using rational, logical, objective, and systematic means. It also proposes the utilization of a manager's technical, diagnostic, and decision making abilities towards addressing these problems. Also, the art of management believes that decision making and the solving of problems in an organization requires the utilization of a blend of intuition, experience, instinct, and the personal insights of a manager in that given work situation. And that these managers would basically utilize their conceptual, communication, interpersonal, and time management skills in trying to carry out their managerial functions that are related to the tasks. Becoming a manager. There are paths to becoming a manager, and such paths you find out include both an education path as well as an experience path. And both the education and the experience provide for the knowledge of a manager. And we understand that the attributes of a manager that allow for them to be effective in carrying out the managerial functions of an organization would include their knowledge attributes, their skills, and their attitude or behaviors on the job role. And for knowledge gain, it could be gained through cognition, which is formal education. It could be gained through experience on the job. Knowledge also could be gained through participation in training and development, participation in coaching coaching initiatives or mentorship initiatives within an organization. Also, we'll be looking at the role of education. We find out that education plays an important role in the development of a manager because most managers either have a bachelor's degree or an MBA. And those who prior to becoming managers didn't have such degrees eventually, one way or another, return to school to gain some form of knowledge formally through an academic institution. Also, we'll be looking at the role of experience, and it says that experience is as important as education, in as much as education gives you those formal knowledge bases, right? But experience is a foundational part towards inculcating the skills that are required for being effective in managerial roles. So a manager's experience actually aids for them to be successful in the role because they acquire the relevant skills on the role through experience. True, because experience requires assuming the role and facing the day-to-day pressures or expectations or the challenges that come with the role. The scope of management extends to organizations that seek profit and those that do not seek profit. And management is relevant in organizations of every size, of every purpose, of every size of operation as well. For the profit seeking organizations, you find out that large businesses like industrial firms, commercial banks, insurance firms, and so on, as well as small businesses and startup businesses, all those require management for effective outcomes of these organizations and for profits to be made by these organizations. You find out that the managerial functions as well as the efficient and effective use of resources in these sizes of organizations are required for profits to be made by these organizations. Also, you find out that management is relevant as well in multinational organizations that extend their operations to diverse geographical locations. Management allows for sustained performance in as much as the operations cut across different environments that actually impact the businesses differently. Also, management is relevant in not-for-profit organizations such as government organizations that may also be called the cost centers, right? Or academic institutions, which include both public and private schools, colleges, and universities. Management also, and you can see management is relevant in the academia because we've been utilizing Francis Marion University to actually explain managerial functions as well as explain the resources that are needed to be managed efficiently and effectively within organizations. Also, healthcare facilities also require management for effective outcomes in these organizations. The new workplace or new work environments are considerate of the increasing diversity among the employees of organizations. And when you talk of diversity, diversity has several dimensions, but the most common dimensions would include the diversity in age, gender, ethnicity, or physical abilities of the employees of organization. So diversity refers basically to the differences among people or employees of an organization. And you find out that why there's a lot of diversity in the modern workforce too would be based off to or could be hinged on some legislations that have come to being. Example of such legislations will be the Title X, which prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school or any other education program that receives funding from the federal government, right? And you find out that such prohibitions also extend to the work environment of organizations, whereby this legislation also prohibits the discrimination in the workforce based on gender or based on age or race. Now, talk about the changing demographics in the current workplace or the new workplace. It's basically talking about the several generations that exist in the current workplace, and these generations will be attributable to age groups, diverse age groups. And you find out that there are lots of generations in the current workforce because there is basically a lot of retirees who are coming back to the workforce or to the job pools, right? They have a longer term career prospect, right? And in an environment like the US environment where healthcare is relatively good, people tend to work for older. So they working for older and having young people join the workforce, you find out that it could allow for organizations to have several generations, several age generations in their workforce. Another reason why there are changing demographics in the compos why there are changes in the demographic composition of organizations will be the declining birth rates in the US, right? So when the average age of US workers is gradually increasing, right? Because a lot of births are not happening and the older people are now forced to stay longer in the workforce because there are no younger people also joining the workforce because of the decline in birth rates. Further on the changing demographics in the workplace, you find out that, as earlier mentioned, given the healthcare system and how effective it is in the United States, people are able to live for longer and as well work for longer. And for them, working for longer means that there will be a lot more generations of age within the workforce of an organization. And also, you find out that retirees are now being engaged as part-time or temporary employees within organizations. Like earlier mentioned, when I said, for instance, if in the School of Business there is need to fill a faculty position, a vacant faculty position, one of the alternatives that could be adopted towards filling that vacancy or filling that faculty need, right? One of the approaches that could be adopted by the dean would be to re-engage retired professors to take on some classes on a temporary basis, right? And given that, it means that people of the age generation that should be classified as retirees are back in the labor force and now allowing for a larger number of age generations within the organization. That is why there are changing demographics. So people who should be considered retirees are equally now part of the workforce of organizations. Also, you find out that there are increasing number of different races within the organization. And when I mention races, I'm talking of like the Hispanics, the African Americans in the workplace, as well as immigrants such as myself, because I am a Nigerian working in the American environment. That tells you that there are changing demographics in Francis Marion University. Not just that they have a black person as a professor, but they have a black immigrant as a professor in an academic institution in an American environment. That contributes to the changing demographics of Francis Marion University. Also, another thing that contributes to the new workplace would be the increasing number of women in white and blue collar jobs, right? You find out that prior to recent times, women were not found in blue and white collar jobs. They were predominantly occupied by men. But in the new workplace, you find out that there are increasing number of women in such jobs. Technology and advances in technology are also challenges that are faced in the new workplace. They constitute for challenges in the new workplace. And examples of such challenges that are constituted by technology would include the smartphones and wireless networks that aid communication. You find out that this also impacts the new workplace. You find out that for technologies like the smartphone that employees always have or are able to receive official emails on their smartphones 24 hours in a day, that actually impacts like the working hours of employees, because when they are not within their working hours, they could equally be responding to work related emails because of the impact of advances in technology that allowed for wireless networks that provide for communication in these smart devices such as their cell phones that now allow for emails such as official emails to come into their phones even during unofficial hours, and they are compelled to respond to those emails. So you find out that technology has a huge impact in the new workplace. Also, you see, that's why he says that it blurs the lines of work and personal life, right? So such technology blurs those lines, and it results in increased pace of work and amount of information that must be processed. So you find out that since communications are done electronically, right, a lot of information is passed on frequently from person to person within organizations and across several platforms or media, right? And outcomes of technology on the work process of organizations would include that it creates for flatter organizations, meaning that there is no need for bottlenecks or bureaucracy or several hierarchies. The advance in technology actually modifies the structures of organizations, allowing for organizations to be more organic than mechanistic, as the case may be. The expectations of managers in the new workplace include for managers to create an attractive environment for workers today. And such attractive environments may comprise ensuring that there are no formal communications or that employees are not compelled to respond to formal communications outside their hours. So in that being said, that allows for some form of work-life balance for the employees. That's an attractive environment for employees. Also, managers should be prepared to cope with changes in the environment that are consistent. And as we know, with the acronym VUCA, which relates to the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity of today's work environment, managers should be prepared that those dynamism or changes that are persistent in the environment, that they are required to come up with adaptive measures to cope with those changes. Also, they should be aware of the fact that advances in technology would consistently be a challenge for them as managers in the new workplace. And also that the new workplace avails these managers a complex array of organizing opportunities or possibilities.